3 hours after my wife's funeral, I saw my daughter pull a cream-colored paper from the back of her mother's desk. The instant she read it, her face drained of color. She crushed it in her fist, threw it into the trash, and whispered, "Worthless. Some things should stay buried forever." She never noticed me watching. After she and her husband left, I retrieved it and drove straight to the bank. The manager read one line, locked the office door, and shouted, "Call the police now. And do not let this man leave. If you made it here, I'm more grateful than you know. Drop a comment and tell me, where are you watching from? Your city, your country. I want to know who's in this room with me." At Dad Family Revenge, every voice matters. A note: this story weaves fictional elements into a framework built for meaning. Names and places are coincidental, but what this story is trying to tell you is worth hearing. The rain came down in thin, cold needles the morning we buried Margaret. 23 people stood at East Lawn Memorial Cemetery. I counted them twice, the way a man counts things when his mind refuses to stay still. The minister's voice moved across the wet grass, steady and practiced, and I stood beside my daughter Claire and told myself that grief looks different on different people. Claire's phone vibrated twice during the eulogy. She didn't reach for it, but her jaw tightened each time, like a door being pulled shut from the inside. Evan stood one step behind her, his eyes moving across the cemetery with the quiet efficiency of a man making calculations. I told myself they were grieving. I had been telling myself that for years. 3 hours later, we were back at the apartment on Northwest Lovejoy Street, moving through boxes and garbage bags and the accumulated evidence of 46 years. Claire went straight to Margaret's writing desk and began sorting through the drawers with both hands. Too quickly, the speed of someone looking for something specific rather than someone honoring what they found. A single cream-colored sheet slipped from between two envelopes. Claire's hand shot out and caught it before it could fall. Her fingers closed around it hard, and I watched something move across her face, wide eyes, then narrowed, then a careful blankness that reminded me of a door being locked from the inside. "What is it?" I asked. "Nothing." Too fast. She was already moving toward the kitchen. "Old bank document. Expired. Nothing worth keeping." She dropped it into the white trash bin next to the refrigerator. I heard it land on the coffee grounds. "Trust me," she said, brushing her palms together. "It's worthless. That kind of thing should stay buried forever." 20 minutes later, Claire had a headache and needed to go home. As she passed the refrigerator, her eyes dropped to the trash bin for just a moment. Then she was gone. I sat at the kitchen table until the afternoon light turned orange, then purple, then disappeared entirely. I thought about her hand, the speed of it, the certainty. I thought about Evan looking at that trash bin on his way out the door. At 8:15, I called Pastor James Whitmore. Voicemail. Twice more. Nothing. I stood up, reached into the trash bin, and lifted out the cream-colored paper. It was a Wells Fargo safe deposit box confirmation, rented in Margaret's name 11 years ago. Below the account number, a yellow sticky note in Margaret's precise blue handwriting. "Walter, take this to the Northwest 23rd branch and ask for Nathan Reed. Go alone. Go soon." I did not sleep. At 7:45 the next morning, I walked into Wells Fargo. Nathan Reed looked up when I entered, and his eyes dropped to the paper in my hand before they rose to my face. He stood immediately, closed the blinds, and pressed both hands flat on his desk. "Mr. Hayes," he said carefully, "your daughter was here yesterday morning. She brought your death certificate." My knuckles went white against the back of the chair. "Call them," I said. "Call the police." Detective Marcus Bell arrived 17 minutes after Nathan made the call. He filled the doorframe the way certain men fill doorframes, completely without trying. 51 years old, broad across the shoulders, with a face that had been weathered into something permanent and reliable. He shook my hand firmly and sat beside me rather than across from me, which told me something about how he worked. Financial crimes. Portland PD, he said. 18 years. I'm going to ask uncomfortable questions, Mr. Hayes. I need complete answers. Yes, I said. Detective Nina Parker came in behind him, 34 dark-haired quick eyes that catalogued the room before she'd fully entered it. When she shook my hand, her grip was firm and brief. I'm sorry for your loss, she said. I know this is a difficult day. It's a difficult week, I said. Marcus asked whether I'd suspected anything. I told him the truth that Claire had been attentive since Margaret's health declined, asking questions about the workshop and the property, and I had mistaken her attention for concern. Marcus asked about Evan. I told him Evan had looked at the trash bin on his way out the door the previous afternoon. Marcus and Nina exchanged a glance that held an entire conversation I wasn't part of. Let's open the box, Marcus said. Nathan led us through a heavy door in the back of the branch key and 4-digit code and down into the vault room. Cool, very quiet. Rows of numbered steel boxes along 3 walls. Box 1147 was halfway down the left side. 2 locks. Nathan's master key and the small brass key taped inside the original document, a detail I hadn't noticed until Nathan pointed it out. Both turned. The box slid open as if it had been waiting. 4 items arranged with Margaret's characteristic precision. A second brass key heavier with a number etched into the shank. A slim black notebook with an elastic band. 3 USB drives each labeled in Margaret's handwriting. And a cream-colored envelope with my name written across the front in blue ink, Margaret's blue, the deep, particular blue she always used. My hands were shaking so badly that Nina quietly took the envelope, opened it with a small penknife, and handed me the single page inside without ceremony. I was grateful in a way I couldn't have explained. I read it standing at the table. Walter, I don't know how far Claire has gone. Please do not confront her before you understand the full picture. The brass key opens a hidden compartment inside the piano we restored together. Trust your ears. Sound doesn't lie. I pressed the letter flat against my chest with both hands and held it there. Marcus opened the black notebook. His expression shifted just slightly, the professional composure tightening at the corners. He turned it toward me. 17 pianos from my workshop inventory. 6 crossed out in red ink. Beside each one, a date, a buyer's name, a dollar amount, and a signature. Authorized by Claire Hayes Cole. I gripped the edge of the table. The floor had stopped being reliable. Those are my pianos, I said. Every one of them is still listed in my current inventory. But according to this, Nina said quietly, 6 have already been sold. I sat down. Then we'd better start, I said, because I'm beginning to understand that I don't know nearly as much as I thought I did. Hayes piano, restoration smelled the way it always had, wood shavings, metal polish, and the particular dry warmth of instruments that had been breathing the same air for decades. I had spent more hours inside these brick walls than inside any house I had ever lived in. Samuel Price was at the workbench when we came through the loading dock. He was 58 years old, broad-handed, permanently stained at the knuckles from 30 years of finish work. When he turned and saw me, really saw me with Marcus and Nina flanking me, and the expression I was apparently wearing, the blood left his face so fast, I actually reached out a hand to steady him. Walter, he said. The word came out scraped and hollow. The 6 pianos, Samuel, I said. Tell me. His hands gripped the edge of the workbench behind him, knuckles blanching white. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. Then something in his shoulders gave way, and the fight went out of him all at once like air from a punctured tire. Claire came in 20 months ago, he said. March, while you were at Providence with Mrs. Hayes. She had purchase agreements, inventory transfer authorizations, a letter on workshop letterhead. Everything had your signature. It wasn't my signature. I know that now. His voice cracked hard on the last word. God help me, Walter, I thought it was. I've seen your name on 1,000 documents. These looked right. And she said you'd approved everything by phone, that you were too stressed about Margaret to deal with the paperwork directly. He pressed the back of his hand against his mouth jaw, trembling. I should have called you. I should have picked up the phone and called you right then. Marcus was already photographing the documents Samuel retrieved from the filing cabinet. I looked at my forged signature under the workshop's overhead light. The letter forms were close, the proportion nearly correct, but the W in Walter was wrong. The pen pressure was too even, too uniform. A natural signature breathes. This one had been traced from a sample copied by someone who understood form, but not the unconscious rhythm of a hand that has written the same name for 70 years. Under Oregon law, Marcus said, not looking up from his phone, forging a signature on a property transaction is forgery in the first degree. Class C felony. Up to 5 years per count. He glanced at the 6 agreements spread across the bench. 6 counts, minimum. Samuel made a sound that wasn't quite a word. We walked the workshop floor after that. Nina checked the physical inventory against Margaret's notebook, while I followed behind, and with every empty shelf and missing bracket, the number grew larger and more grotesque in my mind. The ivory key coverings, legal to own with proper documentation, from before the 1989 international ban, worth $40,000 to the right collector. The German copper wire from my Nuremberg supplier of 22 years. The Renner hammer shanks in old-growth beech that I couldn't source anymore. $800,000, I said when Nina looked at me for an estimate. At minimum. The number sat in the air of my workshop like a wrong note that wouldn't resolve. The inventory records show everything as present, Samuel said, his voice now barely above a whisper. She had me update them after each transfer. Said it was a temporary discrepancy. Said it would all be reconciled after the business restructure. I turned to look at him fully. His eyes were red at the rims, now wet and ashamed, and he was gripping the workbench as though the floor beneath him had become unreliable. Samuel, I said, did my daughter threaten you? His jaw tightened. He didn't answer immediately, and that silence told me more than words would have. We'll come back to that, Marcus said quietly. I pressed both palms flat against the familiar grain of my workbench and breathed through my nose until the shaking in my hands slowed. 43 years. I had built this place with 43 years of early mornings and careful work, and it had been quietly hollowed out while I sat at Margaret's bedside, believing I was surrounded by people who loved me. Do you want to confront her now? Marcus asked. I thought of Margaret's letter. Do not confront her before you understand the full picture. No, I said. There's more. I can feel it. I straightened up. We keep going. Claire called at 8:15 the next morning, her voice carrying that particular warmth she deployed when she wanted something, and knew she had to be careful about how she asked for it. Dad, I've been thinking about you all night. How are you holding up? I'm managing, I said. I was standing at the kitchen window watching the rain move across the rooftops of Northwest Lovejoy in slow gray sheets. Marcus had called at 7 to remind me act normal, give her nothing. I had told him I understood. Can Evan and I come by this morning? There's something we need to discuss. Something that could actually help you. I gripped the phone a little tighter. Come at 10, I said. They arrived 9 minutes early, which told me they had been parked nearby, waiting. Claire was dressed carefully, a soft gray sweater, dark slacks, her mother's kind of colors on her mother's kind of day. She carried a bakery box from Ken's Artisan on Northwest 21st and 2 cups of coffee from the place on the corner that Margaret had always liked. The gestures were precise and deliberate, and they made my chest ache in a way that had nothing to do with gratitude. Evan set his laptop bag on the table and unrolled a set of architectural drawings across the surface without being asked. The rendering showed my workshop transformed exposed brick walls hung with Edison lighting a polished concrete floor, where my workbenches had stood for 40 years, a raised performance stage where the piano storage racks used to be. At the bottom of the rendering in clean sans serif type the words, "The Ivory Hall, where heritage becomes legacy." "The investors are serious, Dad," Claire said, pulling a chair close to mine and sitting with her knees angled toward me, the posture of a woman delivering difficult news with compassion. "But they need certainty. They need to know the property is available." She slid a document across the table, a financial summary showing Hayes Piano Restoration, carrying $940,000 in outstanding debt. "I've been trying to protect you from how bad it's gotten." Mom knew. It was breaking her heart. The mention of Margaret hit me like a closed fist to the sternum. My eyes burned, and I had to breathe carefully through my nose to keep my face from showing what was moving through me. The debt summary was fabricated. I knew that with absolute certainty I had reviewed the workshop's actual accounts with my accountant 6 months ago, and the books were sound. But the document in front of me was professionally formatted, complete with letterhead and account numbers that looked genuine to anyone who wasn't looking closely. Claire was very good at this. "We would pay off every outstanding balance," Evan said, leaning forward with his elbows on the table. "You'd be free of it completely, and you'd still have a space in the building we're designating a restoration studio in the East Wing. You could keep working on instruments, on your own schedule." A restoration studio, in the East Wing of my own building, as a courtesy. "How much time do I have to decide?" I asked. "The investors want confirmation by end of the week," Claire said. She reached across and covered my hand with hers. Her fingers were warm and her grip was gentle, and I thought about how many years I had held that hand across hospital waiting rooms through school plays and arguments and reconciliations and the long, ordinary evenings that make up most of a life. "I know this is hard, Dad, but I truly believe it's the right thing, for both of us." I looked at the architectural rendering. I looked at the fabricated debt summary. I looked at my daughter's face, which was arranged into an expression of such careful, practiced love that for one terrible moment I almost believed it. "Let me sleep on it," I said. Claire's smile didn't waver. "Of course. Take the time you need." After they left, I stood at the window and called Marcus. "She brought fabricated financial documents," I said. "Professionally done. Fake debt totaling nearly $1 million. That's wire fraud preparation," Marcus said. "Document forgery. We're adding it to the file." A pause. "How are you doing?" I watched a pigeon land on the fire escape across the street, shake the rain from its feathers, and look around with the brisk practicality of a creature that had no time for grief. "I'm doing what Margaret asked me to do," I said. "I'm understanding the full picture before I move." "Good," Marcus said. "Because tonight, Walter, you need to open the piano." The grand piano sat where it had always sat, between the east window and the bookshelf Margaret had organized by color rather than title blues, bleeding into greens, greens into yellows, the whole arrangement more like a garden than a library. I had built the hidden compartment myself in 1991. Carved it into the underside of the music rest, support a narrow slot invisible unless you knew exactly where to press. Margaret had watched me build it and said, "That's the most Walter Hayes answer you've ever given me." She had remembered it for 33 years and never told another person it existed. I pressed my thumb into the lower left corner of the support angled upward the way I had designed it, and felt the latch release with a soft click. Inside a Sony handheld recorder, the one I had given Margaret in 2009 for capturing her compositions. A bundle of handwritten sheet music tied with red kitchen twine. A sliver of mahogany with a number etched in Margaret's handwriting. A yellow sticky note on the back of the recorder read, "Start with number 1. Don't stop until you've heard them all." I sat on the piano bench, pressed play, and listened to my wife's voice fill the quiet apartment. My heart broke open so suddenly, I had to press my fist against my mouth to keep from making a sound. Margaret spoke first, steady, precise, the voice of someone choosing every word with care. She explained that the recorder had been concealed inside the second volume of the Encyclopedia Britannica set on the east wall. "Claire has never once taken a book from that shelf," she said. "I've lived with her for 41 years, and she has never watched a book she wasn't required to. Even here, even now, Margaret found a way to be exactly herself." I laughed, and it came out wet and broken. The first recording began. Claire's voice, close and clear, she had been standing within 2 feet of the recorder without knowing it. "We need to move on Okafor. If she keeps running those blood pressure logs, she's going to start asking questions we can't answer. I have a contact at a private practice in Beaverton. He'll manage her medications, keep the reports vague, nothing flagged." The blood in my hands went cold. Dr. Patricia Okafor had been Margaret's physician for 19 years. Margaret had brought her homemade jam at Christmas. She had trusted her completely, and Claire had tried to take that from her, replace her with someone who would keep the picture unclear, the flags unraised, the truth buried. The third recording made my stomach clench so hard I had to set the recorder down. "Her pressure's been climbing for 8 months, Claire said, her voice brisk and practical. "The stress is doing the work for us. Letters the supplier calls the insurance notices, every week. Don't let it go quiet. Every brick matters, Evan. Every single one." I sat in the dark and felt something shift permanently inside my chest. Margaret had lived her final months under a deliberate, calculated pressure campaign designed by her own daughter. Every fabricated debt notice, every supplier complaint, every threatening letter, Claire had been engineering them like clockwork. Brick by brick, she had built a wall of anxiety around her mother and called it concern, and Margaret had known. She had sat across the dinner table from Claire and smiled and recorded every word. The 9th recording pulled me off the bench so fast, the piano struck a low, startled bass note behind me. "If this unravels, Sophie takes the fall. She's been copying Dad's signature for months. She's 17. They won't prosecute hard." My legs were shaking. I gripped the edge of the piano with both hands and breathed until the shaking slowed. Sophie. 17 years old. Who brought Margaret wildflowers from the garden because she knew her grandmother loved them. Claire had already written her a role in the story. The 13th recording was Claire alone, flat, certain, final. "After the deed transfers, I file for divorce. Everything is in Evan's name, the LLC, the accounts, the contracts. He carries it. I walk away clean." I called Marcus. He answered on the second ring. 13 recordings, I said. She tried to replace Margaret's doctor. She was sending stress letters on a weekly schedule. She's planned to hand Sophie to the prosecutors if it falls apart. I paused. And she's planning to divorce Evan afterward and let him take everything. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "I need copies. Tomorrow morning, 7 a.m. "I'll be there," I said. "Walter." His voice dropped. "Are you all right?" I looked at the open compartment beneath the music rest. At the small recorder on the piano keys, its red light blinking slowly in the dark apartment. "She carried all of this alone," I said. so that when the time came, the evidence would be airtight. My throat tightened until the words came out rough and scraped. She was the bravest person I've ever known, Marcus, and I never once understood the half of it. Providence Medical Group occupied the ground floor of a building on Northwest 22nd that had been a dry goods store in a previous life, and you could still see the original pressed tin ceiling through the modern lighting fixtures if you looked up at the right angle. Margaret and I had been coming here for 19 years. I knew the smell of the waiting room antiseptic and old carpet, and the particular institutional warmth of a space that processed human suffering 8 hours a day and did its best to make that bearable. Dr. Patricia Okafor was 60 years old, Nigerian-American, with close-cropped silver hair and the kind of direct, unhurried attention that made you feel in the first 30 seconds of any conversation that you were the only person in the building. She had been Margaret's physician since 2005. Margaret had called her Patricia. She had called Margaret my most opinionated patient, which was the highest compliment she knew how to give. She came out to the waiting room herself rather than sending a nurse, which told me she already understood that this was not a routine visit. "Walter," she said, and took both my hands in hers briefly, a firm, warm pressure that lasted exactly long enough to convey what it needed to. "Come in." Her office was small and ordered diplomas on one wall, a child's drawing, tacked above the monitor on her desk, a grandchild's, I guessed, given the proportions. She sat across from me and folded her hands on the desk and looked at me with the steady, clear-eyed attention that had made Margaret trust her for 2 decades. "Tell me what you need to know," she said. I told her about the recordings. Not the details, not yet, not without Marcus present, but enough. Claire had attempted to have Margaret's care transferred to a different physician, a physician Claire had selected. I needed to know if that attempt had succeeded, and I needed to know what Dr. Okafor had observed about Margaret's health in the final year. Dr. Okafor listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of uncertainty, but the quiet of a woman choosing her words with the care they deserved. "Claire called this office in April of last year," she said. "She told my receptionist that Margaret had been experiencing confusion and that the family felt it would be better to consolidate her care with a provider closer to Claire's home in Beaverton." She paused. "I called Margaret directly that afternoon. Margaret told me, and I am quoting her exactly because I wrote it down at the time, that she had no idea what Claire was talking about, and that she would be keeping her appointments here until one of us retired." A brief, sad smile crossed her face. She said it exactly like that. Something in my chest loosened slightly, a knot I hadn't known was there. She came in 6 weeks later for her regular appointment. Dr. Okafor continued. She was sharp, engaged, entirely herself. We talked about a poem she'd been reading. We adjusted her blood pressure medication slightly. She stopped. "Walter, I need to tell you something directly, and I need you to hear it the way I mean it." "Go ahead," I said. Margaret's systolic blood pressure increased by an average of 18 points over the 8 months preceding her stroke. That is a significant and clinically meaningful elevation. The medication adjustment helped, but it was not sufficient to fully offset what we were seeing. She held my gaze steadily. Sustained psychological stress, chronic unrelenting stress, is a well-documented risk factor for cardiovascular events. I cannot tell you that stress caused Margaret's stroke. Medicine doesn't work with that kind of certainty, and I won't pretend otherwise. But I can tell you that what I was seeing in her numbers was consistent with someone living under prolonged pressure that was not being adequately explained by her lifestyle or her age. The room felt very still. I thought about the recordings. Every brick matters, Evan. Every single one. Letters arriving weekly, supplier complaints, fabricated insurance notices. Brick by brick, Claire had built a wall of anxiety around her mother and called it concern. "Did she ever tell you what was worrying her?" I asked. My voice came out rougher than I intended. Dr. Okafor's expression shifted, something careful moving behind her eyes. "She told me the workshop was having difficulties, that she was concerned about your retirement planning, that she sometimes felt, and this is her word," Walter watched. She paused. I asked her what she meant by that. She said she wasn't sure. She said sometimes she felt like the house was different when she came back to it, that things had been moved slightly, that she couldn't trust her own memory of where she'd left things. Her voice dropped very slightly. I told her that was worth paying attention to. She said she was already paying attention. I had to press my hand flat against my sternum and breathe through my nose for a long moment. Margaret had felt it. The small displacements, the sense of being monitored, she had felt it, and she had said nothing to me. Because telling me would have meant watching me confront Claire before the evidence was complete. She had absorbed that discomfort, folded it into herself, kept it away from me. She had protected me from the cost of knowing right up until the end. "Walter." Dr. Okafor's voice was gentle but direct. "Whatever is happening, whatever you've found, please make sure the right people are involved. This is beyond what any of us should carry alone." "They're involved," I said. "That part is already done." She walked me to the door herself. In the hallway, she stopped and turned to me, and her expression had shifted into something more personal, less physician, more the woman who had known my wife for 19 years. "She was very proud of you," Dr. Okafor said. "She told me once that you were the most honest person she had ever known, that you couldn't be dishonest even when it would have made your life easier." A pause. I think she was counting on that. I thanked her and walked back to my car through the light Portland rain, and I sat in the driver's seat for a long time, without starting the engine, listening to the rain on the roof, and thinking about what it meant to be the person someone counted on when they couldn't afford to ask you directly. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat. "An unknown number, Seattle area code." I answered. "Mr. Hayes." The voice was older male, careful. "My name is Thomas Whitfield. I'm calling from Seattle. I purchased 2 pianos last month from a woman who told me they belonged to your late wife's estate." A pause waited with something I couldn't yet identify. "I've just been informed that you are not in fact deceased, and that Margaret Hayes asked me to call you if you ever reached out." Another pause. "She called me 2 weeks before she died, Mr. Hayes. She said there were things I needed to tell you. I think we should meet." My hand tightened around the phone until I could feel my pulse in my fingertips. "When can you be in Portland?" I asked. Swan Island sat on the western bank of the Willamette, a flat industrial peninsula that the city had been arguing about redeveloping for 30 years without ever quite committing to a plan. In the early morning, with the river fog still thick across the water and the cranes of the shipyard rising out of the gray, like something prehistoric, it felt like the kind of place where things got put when people didn't want to think about them anymore. Marcus had traced the number on the mahogany sliver to a storage facility on North Channel Avenue, a private operation, 12 rows of corrugated steel containers stacked too high, the kind of place that asked few questions and kept clean records for exactly that reason. The manager met us at the gate with a clipboard and the practiced incuriosity of a man who had learned that knowing less was a professional advantage. Container Row 7, Unit 43. The lock was a standard commercial padlock. Marcus had a warrant, and the manager had a bolt cutter, and between them the door swung open in under a minute. The smell hit me first, the particular combination of wood treatment and felt damping material, and the faint mineral tang of metal strings under tension. I had been breathing that smell for 43 years. I would have known it in complete darkness. 4 pianos stood inside, draped in moving blankets. Their identifying marks removed the manufacturer plates. The serial number tags, the small brass Hayes piano restoration labels, I affixed to the interior of every instrument that passed through my workshop. Someone had spent careful time making them anonymous. I pulled the blanket from the nearest one, a Steinway Model B, 1938. Hamburg built with the original ivory keys and the particular warmth of resonance that only comes from a soundboard that has been vibrating for 86 years. I had spent 4 months on this instrument in 2019. I knew the grain of its cabinet wood the way I knew the back of my own hand. My throat closed so hard and so fast that I had to turn away from it. Marcus put a hand briefly on my shoulder, just for a second, just enough, and then moved away to photograph the container's contents while Nina examined the rental agreement the manager had provided. "Contracts in the name of Samuel Price," Nina said. "Signed 14 months ago. Monthly payments drawn from a personal account." She looked up. "Mr. Hayes Samuel signed this himself." I already knew on some level that Samuel was here in this somewhere. I had known it since the workshop, since the way he had gripped the bench and waited for the sentence. But knowing something and hearing it stated plainly in a cold storage container at 7 in the morning are two different experiences, and the second one landed in my chest like a stone dropped into still water. "I know," I said. "We found Samuel at the workshop when we returned. He was at his bench, but he wasn't working. He was sitting on his stool with a cold cup of coffee in front of him, and the expression of a man who had not slept and had spent the wakeful hours arriving at a decision. When he saw me come through the door, he stood up. His eyes were red-rimmed and swollen, and his hands, those broad, reliable hands that had helped me restore hundreds of instruments over 3 decades, were shaking visibly at his sides. "Walter," he said, and his voice came apart on the single word, cracking clean through the middle. "I am so sorry. I am so deeply, completely sorry." "Sit down, Samuel," I said, "and tell me everything." He told us. Claire had approached him 22 months ago on a Wednesday afternoon when I was at Providence with Margaret. She had come in through the back entrance. She had always known the code had grown up punching those 4 numbers, and she had sat across from Samuel at the workbench and laid out what she knew about Derek. Derek Price was 31 years old, Samuel's only son, who had been battling a gambling problem since his mid-20s. The debt had accumulated gradually, the way these things do, first the credit cards, then the personal loans, then the kind of lenders who operate outside the structures that protect borrowers. By the time Claire came to Samuel that Wednesday afternoon, Derek owed $194,000 to people who were not patient creditors. Claire had bought the debt. She had purchased it from the primary lender for a discounted sum. Samuel didn't know the exact figure, and she now held Derek's financial future in a manila folder that she set on the workbench between them and tapped with one finger. She said if I helped her, Derek's debt would disappear. Samuel told us. His jaw was trembling so hard he had to press his teeth together between sentences to control it. She said if I didn't, she would call Derek's other creditors and tell them exactly where he was living. He'd already had to move twice. He was staying with a friend in Tigard, trying to get clean, trying to start over. He stopped, pressed the back of his hand hard against his mouth. She knew all of it, Walter. She knew his address, his employer, his girlfriend's name. She had done her research. Under Oregon law, what Claire had done constituted criminal extortion, ORS 163.275, compelling someone to act against their will through a threat of harm to a third party. Marcus was writing steadily in his notebook. "What did she ask you to do?" Marcus said. "Transfer the instruments. Update the inventory records to show them as present. Redirect supplier calls. Forward cancellation requests from clients before they reached Walter." Samuel's voice had dropped to something barely above a murmur. And one other thing." He stopped. "Samuel," I said. He looked up at me, and his eyes were so full of shame and exhaustion, and the particular grief of a man who has watched himself become someone he doesn't recognize, that I felt my own chest tighten in response. "The machinery," he said. "The dryer failures, the fire system report. She told me what to do, and I did it. I told myself each time it was the last time. I told myself Derek just needed a little more time to get stable, and then I would come to you and explain everything, and we would find a way." He pressed both hands flat on the workbench and leaned his weight into them. "I never came to you. Every time I was going to, I thought about Derek, and I—" His voice broke completely open, and he dropped his face into his hands and wept hard, shaking sobs that moved through his whole body, the kind of crying that has been held back for so long, that when it finally comes, it brings everything with it. I stood across the bench from this man, who had worked beside me for nearly 30 years, who had taught me things about felt hammer, voicing that I hadn't known after 20 years in the trade, who had driven 2 hours each way to be at Margaret's memorial service and stood in the rain without complaint. And I felt something move through me that was not quite anger and not quite forgiveness, but existed in the difficult territory between them. I walked around the bench and put my hand on his shoulder. "You should have come to me," I said. "The day she walked in. You should have called me, and we would have handled Derek's situation together. That was always an option, Samuel. It was always there." He lifted his face from his hands, eyes swollen, cheeks wet, jaw still working. "I know," he said. "I know that now." "Derek," I said, "is he still in Tigard?" "He got a job," Samuel said, and a tremor of something almost like pride moved briefly through the wreckage of his expression. "3 months ago. He's been clean for 7 months. He's trying so hard, Walter." "Good," I said. "That matters." I looked at Marcus. "It matters to the full picture." Marcus nodded. He understood what I was saying, that Samuel's cooperation, his willingness to testify, his history of being coerced rather than willing, would all be relevant when the time came for the legal machinery to assign weight to what each person had done. "I kept copies," Samuel said suddenly. He reached beneath the bench and retrieved a small flash drive from inside the hollow handle of a tuning hammer, a hiding place so specific to our world that only someone who knew the tools would ever think to look. Every message she sent me, every instruction. I saved them all. He held the drive out to me, and his hand was shaking so badly I had to reach out and steady it with both of mine to take it. I was afraid, but I wasn't stupid. I knew that someday I would need to be able to prove what happened to me. I closed my fingers around the drive. "There's one more thing," Nina said from across the room. She had been reviewing something on her tablet, and now she looked up with an expression I was beginning to recognize, the particular stillness she adopted when something significant had appeared in the data. "Samuel, the last message Claire sent you, the one dated 2 weeks ago. Can you tell us what it said?" Samuel closed his eyes briefly. "She said that after the opening night event, everything was to be transferred to an account she would send me separately. She said not to tell Evan which account, that he didn't need to know." Marcus looked at me. I looked at the flash drive in my hand and at the 4 pianos standing in their moving blankets in the cold Swan Island air, and at Samuel Price sitting on his stool with 30 years of loyalty and 8 months of coercion written in equal measure across his exhausted face. "She was planning to leave Evan behind," I said, "from the beginning." "It looks that way," Marcus said quietly. Outside, the river fog was beginning to thin. Somewhere across the Willamette, a crane swung slowly through the clearing air, carrying something heavy from one place to another, the way things get moved when the ground beneath them has finally given way. Before I tell you what Sophie had been hiding on her phone for nearly a year, and what her mother's deleted emails revealed that changed everything, drop a 7 in the comments right now, so I know you're still with me. Because what comes next is the piece of this I almost wasn't ready to find. A reminder, the story you're hearing contains fictionalized elements woven around a framework that reflects patterns far too common in real families. If that's not something you want to continue with, no judgment at all. But if you're staying, you'll want to hear what happens next. I heard her before I saw her. A faint sound from the direction of my study. The soft, careful sound of a drawer being closed slowly, the way someone closes a drawer when they are trying not to be heard. I had lived in this apartment for long enough that I knew every sound it made the way you know the sounds of any place you have inhabited long enough to stop noticing them consciously. That particular sound did not belong to the afternoon. I set my keys on the kitchen counter without making a sound and walked to the study doorway. Sophie was standing at my desk with her back to me, her phone raised, photographing the property deed for the Northwest 23rd workshop site. The original deed, the one I kept in the top right drawer, beneath the insurance folders. The one with the county recorder's stamp from 1974, when my father had first taken title to the land. She was 17 years old, and she was wearing the green jacket Margaret had given her for her birthday last spring, and for one terrible, disorienting second, she looked so much like Claire at that age that my heart seized in my chest. "Sophie," I said. The phone dropped from her hands and clattered against the desk. She spun around, and the expression on her face, the shock, the guilt, the immediate flooding of tears, told me everything I needed to know before she said a single word. "Grandpa, Her voice collapsed. She pressed both hands over her mouth, shoulders heaving, and the tears came fast and hard, running down her face in 2 straight lines, while she stood there and shook. "I didn't. Mom said she told me you were—" "Sit down," I said. Not harshly, I kept my voice level, the way I kept it level when a client brought me an instrument they'd damaged through carelessness and couldn't quite meet my eyes. "Sit down and tell me what your mother told you." She dropped into the chair at my desk like her legs had simply stopped working. Her hands were trembling in her lap, and she was trying to control the crying and failing entirely, each breath coming out in a broken, stuttering rhythm. I called Nina Parker. Nina arrived in 11 minutes, which told me she had been nearby, probably parked on Northwest Lovejoy, which told me Marcus had anticipated this possibility. She came in without ceremony, assessed the situation in one quick sweep of the room, and pulled a chair alongside Sophie rather than across from her, the same deliberate positioning Marcus had used with me at the bank 3 days and a lifetime ago. "Sophie," Nina said. Her voice was completely different from her professional register, softer, more direct, stripped of the careful neutrality she used in interviews. "My name is Nina. I'm not here to arrest you or charge you with anything. I need you to understand that first." "Okay." Sophie looked at her with red, swollen eyes. "Okay," she whispered. "Can you tell me what your mom asked you to do?" Sophie wiped her face with the sleeve of Margaret's jacket and took a breath that shuddered all the way through her. She said Grandpa was hiding financial documents. She said he was confused, that he'd been confused for a while, that he was making decisions that were going to hurt the family, and that she needed to understand what papers he had so she could protect him. She stopped. She said it was to help him. She said she was worried about him. "When did she first ask you?" Nina said. "About 8 months ago." Sophie's voice was very small. She started with the insurance documents. Said she just wanted to see if the premiums were current. Then the tax returns. Then the property records. She looked at me, and the expression on her face was one I recognized, the specific anguish of someone who has realized too late that the thing they were told was a favor was something else entirely. She said you and she had agreed that she would manage things, that you were relieved to hand it over. Did that sound like me? I asked. Sophie closed her eyes. 2 fresh tears ran down her face. No, she said. But she's my mom. I wanted to believe her. Nina leaned forward slightly. Sophie, your mom also asked you to practice copying your grandfather's signature. Is that right? The girl's breath caught audibly. Her hands clenched together in her lap until the knuckles went white. She said it was an exercise. She said Grandpa used to do handwriting practice with her when she was little, and she wanted to show me the same thing. She stopped, pressed her lips together hard. I did it for 3 weeks. She said my version was good. She seemed she was happy about it. She hugged me. Sophie's voice broke on the last 2 words, in a way that made my chest hurt, in a completely different place than it had been hurting all week. I didn't know what it was for. I promise I didn't know. I believe you, Nina said, simply directly without qualification. I left the room for a moment, walked to the kitchen, stood at the window, breathed. Outside, the rain had returned in earnest, the way Portland rain does in November, settling in for the long conversation it intended to have with the city. I pressed my forehead against the cold glass and thought about Claire teaching Sophie to copy my signature and calling it an exercise and hugging her afterward, and I felt something move through me that was hot and clean and absolute. When I came back, Sophie looked up at me with an expression so raw it was almost unbearable. Did she show you Grandma's piano? She asked. The hidden part? I stopped. What do you know about the hidden part? Grandma showed me once, Sophie said. 2 years ago. She said it was a secret between us. She said someday it would matter, and I would know why. Fresh tears spilled over. I didn't tell Mom. I don't know if that was the right thing, but it felt like something that belonged to just me and Grandma, so I kept it. I sat down on the edge of the desk and looked at my granddaughter, 17 years old, wearing her dead grandmother's jacket, crying in the chair where Margaret had once sat to write letters to former students she still thought about. And I understood that Margaret had been working on multiple levels simultaneously. She had kept Sophie close enough to trust, shown her just enough to matter, and banked on the fact that Sophie's love for her was stronger than Claire's influence. She had been right. Sophie, Nina said carefully, your mother's email system, do you have access to it? Sophie blinked, looked at Nina, then at me. She added me to the family account last year, for shared calendars. A pause. I have the password. Nina and I exchanged a look that contained a great deal. I need you to show me something, Nina said. If you're willing, I need you to look at the deleted folder. Sophie pulled out her phone. Her hands were still shaking, but she navigated to the account, with the steadiness of someone who had decided that doing the right thing was going to hurt, and was going to do it anyway. She found the deleted folder. She scrolled, and then she stopped scrolling, and her face changed completely. The grief and guilt replaced by something colder and more final. The expression of someone reading a document that is rearranging everything they thought they knew. Grandpa, she said. Her voice was very quiet. Mom didn't just sign your name. I moved to stand behind her and looked at the screen. 11 email threads, each one containing scanned copies of signed contracts. The signature on each one appeared twice, once as Walter Hayes, once as Margaret Hayes. The dates ran from early 2022 through March of this year, 3 months before Margaret died. She signed Grandma's name, Sophie said. The words came out flat and stunned, like something spoken in the moment after impact, before the pain has had time to arrive. While Grandma was still alive, she signed Grandma's name on contracts. While Grandma was still, she was still here. Sophie's composure broke entirely then. She pressed her face into her hands and wept with the whole weight of it, not the controlled, guilty tears of earlier, but something deeper and more desolate, a grief that had nowhere left to put itself. I put both hands on her shoulders and held on. Nina was already photographing the screen with her own phone, her movements quiet and efficient, and completely separate from the emotional weather in the room, the way good investigators learn to be. "Scroll down further," Nina said gently. "Sophie, I know this is hard, but I need you to scroll down." Sophie lifted her face from her hands and wiped it roughly with her sleeve and scrolled. 3 more screens down, she found the transfer schedule, a dated plan for moving the full deposit balance from 32 couples, totaling $1,240,000, into an account in the Cayman Islands within 48 hours of the grand opening event. No refunds, no forwarding address, no explanation. Sophie read it once, then read it again, her lips moving slightly. "She wasn't going to pay anyone back," Sophie said. She looked up at me and her eyes were dry now, the tears burned off by something harder. "All those couples, their deposits. She was just going to take it and go." "Yes," I said, "and if it went wrong?" Sophie stopped. She remembered the recording I had played her in the container. Her jaw tightened. She was going to say it was me. "That was her plan," I said. Sophie set the phone down on the desk with a steadiness that surprised me. She straightened in the chair, pulled the green jacket tighter around herself, and looked at me with an expression that reminded me so powerfully of Margaret. The particular set of the jaw, the way the eyes steadied when a decision had been made that I had to look away for a moment. "What do you need me to do?" she asked. Thomas Whitfield drove down from Seattle in a rented truck, which told me before he even stepped out of the cab that he had brought the pianos back with him. He was 72 years old, lean and straight-backed with silver hair, and the careful hands of a man who had spent his life around valuable things. He stepped out of the truck in my workshop's loading dock on a gray Saturday morning and looked at me with an expression that was equal parts relief and grief, the face of someone who had been carrying a weight they hadn't asked for and were finally able to set down. "You look like Margaret described," he said. My throat tightened. "She described me. She said you'd be standing in your workshop in work clothes looking like a man who hadn't slept and was pretending he had." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. She was right about both. Thomas Whitfield had been in the same music theory cohort as Margaret at Willamette University in 1974, the year my father bought the workshop building, the year before Margaret and I met at a dinner party on Northwest Thurman, and argued about whether Satya or Debussy had done more damage to students who confused simplicity with depth. Thomas had gone on to build a career in acoustic instrument collecting, based in Seattle, respected in the trade. He and Margaret had stayed in loose contact for 50 years, cards at Christmas, occasional emails about instruments that passed through one or the other's hands. Claire had found him through that history. She had emailed him in September using Margaret's name in the sender line, a display name override technically fraudulent, which Nina had already flagged. The email said that Walter Hayes had passed away suddenly, and that the family was liquidating portions of the instrument collection to settle the estate. Thomas had responded, asked appropriate questions, and received in return a complete documentation package, a death certificate for Walter Hayes, a letter of administration granting Claire authority over the estate, and individual provenance documents for 2 specific instruments. The paperwork was immaculate, Thomas said, and his jaw tightened with something that looked like anger turned inward. "I've been in this business 40 years. I know what proper estate documentation looks like. And I knew Margaret. I thought, who would do this? Who could do this? He stopped. His hands pressed flat against the side of the truck. I should have called to verify. I should have done that. I didn't. She anticipated that most people wouldn't, I said. She built the package to answer the questions before they were asked. 2 weeks before Margaret died, she had called Thomas from her cell phone on a Tuesday afternoon. He had answered, surprised to hear her voice. They hadn't spoken directly in almost 2 years. She sounded tired, Thomas said, but completely clear. She told me she was ill and that she didn't have much time. She said, and I wrote this down because the way she said it made me understand. She said, Thomas, someone may try to sell you instruments from Walter's collection using my name or Walter's death as authorization. If that happens, keep the paperwork. And if Walter Hayes himself ever contacts you about any of this, tell him everything. Tell him I called you. Tell him the date and exactly what I said. I pressed the back of my hand against my mouth and breathed through my nose. She called it an insurance policy. Thomas continued, his voice rough now. She said, I need a witness who exists outside the family, someone they don't know to look for. The 2 pianos came down from the truck on a motorized ramp, a 1931 Mason and Hamlin Model A and a Bosendorfer upright I had restored in 2017. I put my hands on the Bosendorfer's cabinet and felt the familiar grain under my palms, and the relief that moved through me was so sharp it was almost painful. Thomas had already contacted the FBI's Seattle field office when he realized what had happened. Agent Karen Torres, 45. Precise, economical with words, appeared at the workshop an hour later and confirmed the jurisdictional picture in 2 sentences. The cross-state sale constituted wire fraud under federal statute 18 U.S.C. Section 1343, and the case was now jointly managed between Portland PD and the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. Your wife anticipated federal involvement, Agent Torres said, reviewing Thomas's documentation on her tablet. The cross-state element wasn't accidental. She made sure there was a transaction that crossed state lines. I looked at Marcus. She built it so it couldn't stay local, Marcus said quietly. Thomas stayed for the better part of the afternoon, sitting at my workbench, with a cup of coffee he didn't drink, answering every question Nina put to him, with the methodical care of a man determined to be useful. Before he left, he stopped at the door and turned back to me. She also said one more thing, he said. On that phone call. He cleared his throat. She said, don't feel sorry for Walter. He's stronger than he knows. He just hasn't had to be yet. I didn't trust my voice for a moment. Thank you for coming, I said finally. For bringing them back. Thomas nodded once. She asked me to, he said simply. That was enough. Rebecca Harmon's office occupied the 3rd floor of a brick building on Southwest 2nd Avenue in Old Town that had been standing since the Gold Rush era, when Portland was still deciding what kind of city it intended to become. The elevator was the original cage-style, slow and deliberate, and it gave you time to think on the way up whether you wanted it or not. Rebecca herself was 55, compact and precise, with reading glasses pushed up into silver-streaked hair, and the particular quality of stillness that belongs to people who have spent decades listening to other people's worst situations and learned that most of them could be survived. She had been Margaret's attorney for 11 years. She stood when I entered, shook my hand with both of hers, and said, I've been expecting you since the day she passed. Sit down, Walter. This is going to be a full morning. She had the files already arranged on the conference table. Manila folders organized by date, color-coded tabs along the edges, the whole system bearing Margaret's characteristic fingerprints. Rebecca had helped her build it. Your wife came to me for the first time in November of 2017, Rebecca said, settling into her chair across from me. She said she needed to document something quietly over a long period of time and that she needed an attorney who could keep a confidence even under pressure. Rebecca's expression was steady, but something moved behind it. The controlled grief of someone who had known the outcome was coming and had watched it arrive anyway. I've kept that confidence for 7 years. Now I'm going to give you everything. She opened the first folder. The signature forgeries were more extensive than what Sophie had found in the email account. Rebecca laid 11 contracts across the table in chronological order, and I stood over them and looked at Margaret's name signed in blue ink, the deep particular blue she always used on documents authorizing the sale of workshop assets, transfer of storage materials, and one agreement that made my blood run cold when I understood what it was. A consulting services contract dated 14 months ago between Hayes Piano Restoration and a company called Meridian Event Partners, LLC, Claire and Evans operating entity for the Ivory Hall project. The contract authorized Meridian Event Partners to conduct structural assessments of the Northwest 23rd Workshop property and begin preliminary renovation planning. Claire had been billing her own father's business for services rendered to the project designed to take that business from him, and Margaret's forged signature had authorized every payment. Under Oregon Revised Statute 165.013, Rebecca said, her voice level and precise, each instance of forging Margaret's signature constitutes forgery in the first degree, a Class C felony punishable by up to 5 years per count. We have 11 separate counts here. She paused. But the more significant issue from a jurisdictional standpoint is this. She slid a highlighted sheet across the table, a wire transfer record showing a payment from Hayes Piano Restoration's operating account to Meridian Event Partners' business account at a bank in Bellevue, Washington. Cross-state wire transfer, I said, under 18 U.S.C. Section 1343. Rebecca confirmed, that's federal wire fraud. Every payment that crossed the Oregon-Washington state line, and there were 6 falls under FBI jurisdiction. She looked at me over her glasses. Agent Torres is already aware. She called me Friday evening. Marcus was beside me writing steadily in his notebook. Nina was photographing each document with methodical care, working from left to right, across the table, as if she were reading a sentence that needed to be preserved exactly. I looked at the consulting contract, at Margaret's signature, on the authorization line the forged blue ink rendering of a name that had meant something specific and irreplaceable for 68 years, and I felt a fury move through me that was cleaner and colder than anything I had felt yet. Not the hot grief of the recordings, not the hollow shock of the empty workshop shelves. This was something precise and crystalline, like a tuning fork struck against a hard surface, vibrating at a frequency that was going to carry for a long time. There's one more thing, Rebecca said. She placed a single document in front of me, the property transfer agreement, that Claire intended me to sign, the one authorizing the conveyance of the Northwest 23rd Workshop land from Walter Hayes to Claire Hayes Cole. I drafted this, Rebecca said. At Claire's request 3 weeks ago before Margaret died, she came to me directly. A pause. I want you to understand that I did not know at that time what I know now. She represented herself as your authorized agent for estate planning purposes and provided documentation I had no reason to question. I drafted the document in good faith. I looked at the agreement. It was professionally prepared, correct format, proper recitals, everything a legitimate property transfer required. But it's unenforceable, I said. It wasn't a question. I had spoken with Marcus enough in the past week to understand the basic architecture of what was protecting me. Completely, Rebecca said. Under Oregon Revised Statute 93.020, a conveyance of real property has no legal effect until it is signed by the grantor, acknowledged before a notary public, and recorded with the county recorder's office of the county in which the property is located. She tapped the document. This agreement has none of those elements completed. If Claire presented this to investors or lenders as evidence of ownership or pending transfer, she was misrepresenting the state of the title. Rebecca's voice sharpened slightly, which is fraud on top of forgery. She didn't know it was unenforceable, Marcus said. She assumed a signed document was sufficient, Rebecca agreed. A reasonable assumption for someone without legal training. An expensive one. I sat back in my chair and looked at the documents spread across the conference table. 7 years of Margaret's careful preparation, organized into color-coded folders by a woman who had kept the secret faithfully and was now finally releasing it into the daylight where it could do its work. She planned every piece of this, I said, even coming to you before she died. Making sure you had the transfer document so we'd know Claire had approached you. She was thorough, Rebecca said quietly. She was the most thorough client I have ever had. Every time she came in 6 visits over 7 years, she had already thought 3 steps ahead of the question I was going to ask. Rebecca removed her glasses and set them on the table and pressed her fingers against her closed eyes for a moment. She was also very lonely, Walter. I want you to know that. She never said it directly. She wasn't the kind of woman who said things directly when she could demonstrate them instead. But I could see it. The weight of carrying all of this, of not being able to tell you, of watching what Claire was doing, and knowing she had to wait. Rebecca stopped, put her glasses back on. She asked me once if I thought it was worth it. I told her that was her decision to make. She said she'd already made it. She said some things were worth more than comfort. The room was very quiet. Outside, rain moved against the old brick walls of the building, the same rain that had been moving against Portland's bones since November settled impatient and unhurried. The way water is patient when it has all the time in the world. Rebecca, I said, I need you to do something for me. Name it. The grand opening is in 8 days. Claire is expecting me to sign that agreement publicly on a stage in front of investors and press and 32 couples who have paid deposits for weddings they believe are already booked. I looked at her steadily. I need you to help me make sure that when that night ends, every single piece of this is on the table where everyone can see it. So, Marcus had explained it to me that morning, in terms I understood, arresting Claire before the opening would allow her to transfer whatever money remained in the offshore accounts, before we could freeze them. Waiting until the event meant catching both her and Evan simultaneously, with 200 witnesses in the room and a journalist recording everything. Let her think she's already won, Marcus had said. People who think they've won stop being careful. Rebecca looked at me for a long moment. Then she picked up her pen. Tell me what you need, she said. I signed the transfer agreement on Tuesday morning, sitting at my own kitchen table using the pen Margaret had kept in the blue ceramic jar on the counter for as long as I could remember. Claire was across from me, watching with the careful stillness of someone trying not to show how much they wanted this. Evan stood by the window. Neither of them knew that the document I was signing was legally inert, that without a notary's acknowledgement and recording with the Multnomah County Recorder's Office, the conveyance had no effect on the title whatsoever. Rebecca had explained this to Claire's own attorney 11 years ago when drafting standard property agreements. Claire had apparently not retained that particular lesson. Thank you, Dad, Claire said when my pen lifted from the page. Her voice was warm and full and entirely constructed. I know this wasn't easy. No, I said. It wasn't. She took the document, slid it into her portfolio, and by Wednesday morning, the construction crew arrived. They came with ladders and lighting rigs and rolls of white fabric, and they moved through my workshop with the cheerful efficiency of people who had been told they were transforming a tired old building into something better. They pushed my workbenches to the back wall. They hung crystal fixtures from the ceiling, joists my father had installed in 1974. They draped ivory linen across the surfaces, where I had spent 4 decades returning broken instruments to their original voices. I stood in the corner and watched and kept my hands in my pockets and did not speak. Claire directed everything from the center of the room, tablet in hand, her eye moving across the space with the satisfied precision of someone seeing a long-imagined vision take shape. She had a gift for it, genuinely. The proportions she chose were good. The lighting placement was considered. In another life, in a version of events where she had simply asked me instead of taken, I might have been proud of her. That thought hurt more than most of the others. On Thursday evening, Samuel installed the audio relay, a small transmitter, no larger than a matchbox, fitted into the underside of Margaret's piano, where it connected to the venue's speaker system. Only Samuel and I knew it was there. He worked quietly with the focused care he brought to everything, and when he was done, he looked up at me and said, "It'll carry to every speaker in the room, clear as a bell." "Good," I said. "The move won't affect it." "Wireless connection to whatever system is running the room," Samuel said. "They'll never find it." He nodded, then hesitated. "Walter, I know I don't have the right to ask anything of you, but Derek wanted me to tell you he's sorry too. He didn't know what his situation was being used for. He's been clean 7 months now." "I know," I said. "Tell him I said so." Samuel's jaw worked. He pressed his lips together and nodded and went back to his tools. That night, I called Pastor James Whitmore, who had finally returned my calls from the first week and had been quietly present in the background since stopping by the apartment with food I didn't eat. Sitting with me for an hour on Wednesday evening without requiring me to talk, which was the most useful thing anyone had done. "Tomorrow night," I said. "I'll be there," Whitmore said immediately. "Front row if you want me." "Second row," I said. "I need the front for other people." A pause. "Walter, how are you holding up?" I looked around the apartment. Margaret's books on the shelves, her blue ceramic jar on the counter, the piano in the corner with its hidden compartment and its hidden transmitter, and everything it had carried for the past 7 years. "I'm finishing what she started," I said. "That's the only answer I have right now." "It's enough," Whitmore said. "It's more than enough." After I hung up, I went to the piano and sat on the bench and placed both hands on the keys without pressing them down. The felt was cool under my palms. Outside, Portland was doing what Portland does in November, raining, with the patient, unhurried commitment of a city that has made its peace with gray. I thought about Margaret sitting on this same bench on Sunday evenings, her back straight, her hands moving through pieces she had played so many times they lived in her muscles rather than her mind. I thought about the last Sunday before her stroke when she had played for nearly an hour, while I sat in the armchair with a book I wasn't reading, listening to her fill the room with sound. I hadn't known it was the last time. Claire called at 9 o'clock. "Wear the suit I had tailored for you tomorrow, Dad. This is a big night." I looked at my work clothes hanging on the hook by the workshop door, the brown canvas jacket with the frayed left cuff that Margaret had been threatening to mend for 6 years. "I already know what I'm wearing," I said. "Before the night of the grand opening, before I sit down at Margaret's piano one last time and pull on the thread that unravels everything, comment 2 below, so I know you made it this far. Most people won't. You did." This story includes fictionalized elements crafted to carry something true. Any resemblance to specific people or places is coincidental, but the patterns you're about to see play out are ones that destroy families every single day. If you'd rather not continue, there's no shame in that. For those who are staying, the next part changes everything. 7:30 on a Saturday evening in November, and my workshop was unrecognizable. 200 people moved through the space that had been Hayes Piano Restoration, for 43 years, holding champagne flutes and examining the exposed brick walls as if they were discovering them for the first time rather than walking past them on Northwest 23rd every day of their lives. Crystal fixtures hung from the ceiling joists my father had installed in 1974, throwing warm light across the polished concrete floor where my workbenches had stood until 4 days ago. White linen draped every surface. At the far end of the room, elevated on a low platform, Margaret's grand piano sat beneath a cascade of white flowers, gardenias, and white roses, her favorites arranged by someone who had either known her or done their research. The sign above the entrance read, "The Ivory Hall, where heritage becomes legacy," in clean gold letters. Diana Reyes from the Oregon Live was near the door, with a videographer, her press lanyard swinging, as she moved through the crowd. She had covered the Pearl District arts scene for 6 years and knew how to make an opening night look significant on camera. Claire had paid for the coverage. She was going to get more than she bargained for. I stood near the south wall in my brown canvas work jacket, the one with the frayed left cuff, and watched 200 people admire what my daughter had built in the ruins of what I had built, and I kept my breathing even and my hands still and thought about Margaret. Claire found me within 3 minutes of arriving. "Dad?" Her voice was low and tight with a fury she was managing carefully. "I asked you to wear the suit. I know you did. There are investors here. Press. This matters." "It does matter," I agreed. "That's why I dressed for the occasion." She looked at me with an expression that wanted to be anger, and kept sliding into something more uncertain, the look of a woman who had planned for every variable except the one standing in front of her in a $40 work jacket, calm as still water. She squeezed my arm once hard and moved away to greet someone near the bar. At 7:30 exactly, she stepped onto the platform. The room quieted with the speed that rooms quiet when the person who controls the evening steps forward. Claire was dressed in silver, a long-sleeved gown that caught the crystal light and held it designed to suggest both elegance and authority. She was beautiful, my daughter. She had always been beautiful. That had never been the problem. "Tonight," she said, her voice carrying easily to every corner of the space, "is not simply the launch of an event venue. It is the beginning of a conversation about what heritage means and what it costs to preserve it." Behind her, the screen displayed photographs. Claire, at 5 years old, sitting on the workshop floor with sawdust in her hair. Margaret at the piano in the apartment on Northwest Lovejoy, her back straight, her hands in motion. Me at my workbench, 20 years younger, holding a hammer I still use today. Claire's eyes were bright. She had done this, assembled these images, arranged this room, written these words, and she believed them, I think, on some level. That was the part I could not entirely account for, the lie that had grown so large it had absorbed the person telling it. "My father gave 43 years to this place," she said. "Tonight he gives it one more gift, the gift of becoming something new." She looked at me across the room. Her expression was practiced and warm and entirely wrong. "Dad," she said, extending her hand toward the platform. "Will you come up?" The room applauded. 200 people turned to look at me, and I moved through them toward the platform, and I could feel the weight of what was about to happen pressing against the inside of my chest like a second heartbeat. Evan appeared at my elbow with the prepared speech, the one that said I had lost my clarity and was grateful to hand my life's work to my daughter. I took the paper, looked at it, set it on the edge of the piano. "Claire wants me to tell you that I've lost my mental clarity," I said into the microphone. The room shifted, a subtle collective adjustment, the way a crowd moves when something unexpected enters a script. Before I read that, I'd like to play something. My wife wrote a piece she never performed publicly. I'd like to play it tonight in this room on her piano. I think that's the most appropriate way to begin. Claire stepped toward me. That's not... The crowd was already responding, a murmur of approval, someone beginning to applaud the momentum of 200 people who wanted to hear the dead woman's music in the room built from her husband's life. Claire could not stop it without becoming the person who stopped it. Her jaw tightened. Her smile held. I sat down at Margaret's piano. The room went very quiet, the particular hush of people who understand they are about to witness something real in a room that has been constructed entirely from performance. I placed my hands on the keys and felt the familiar resistance of the action, the slight give of the ivory, the instrument breathing beneath my palms. I began to play Home Before Winter. I am not a pianist. Margaret knew this better than anyone. She had spent years trying to teach me, and we had laughed about it more times than I could count. But I knew this piece. I had listened to her play it hundreds of times across 38 years, and it had settled into me the way music settles into the people who love it, not as notes, but as something closer to memory. Every note was slow and deliberate, and slightly imperfect, the way things are when they are true rather than practiced. I played through the opening movement, and the room stayed quiet, and somewhere in the second movement, I heard someone near the back make a soft sound that was not quite a word. I reached the final chord. I held it until the sound dissolved into the room. And then from every speaker in the ivory hall, Samuel's transmitter, doing exactly what he had told me it would do, clear as a bell, Claire's voice filled the space. Just get the old man to sign. We demolished the workshop the morning after. The silence that followed was absolute. The kind of silence that happens after a very loud sound, when the air itself doesn't know what to do next. Claire was on her feet before the echo had finished moving toward the soundboard, with the speed of someone who has just watched everything collapse and is running toward the wreckage on instinct. She was 3 steps from the board when Sophie stepped out of the shadow beside it and stood directly in her path. My granddaughter was 17 years old, wearing a green jacket that had belonged to her grandmother, and she did not move. "Don't," Sophie said. Claire stopped. For one full second, mother and daughter looked at each other across the distance between them, and every performed warmth that Claire had deployed for 41 years was simply gone, stripped away by the one person in the room who had seen behind it and chosen to stand on the other side. "Sophie, I said don't, Mom." Sophie raised the tablet in her hands and pressed play on the next recording. Claire's voice again filling the room a second time. "If everything falls apart, we blame Sophie. She's a minor. They won't prosecute hard." The sound hit the room like a physical thing. I watched it land on 200 faces simultaneously, the confusion giving way to understanding, the understanding giving way to something harder. Claire turned to look at me from across the room, and her face had finally completely let go of everything it had been holding. "Dad," she said. Her voice cracked straight through the middle. "Dad, please." I walked toward the platform steps, toward the microphone, toward the 43 years that were still mine regardless of what had been written on paper. "Let Rebecca speak," I said. Rebecca walked to the microphone with the unhurried confidence of a woman who had been waiting 7 years for this particular moment and intended to use every second of it correctly. "My name is Rebecca Harmon," she said. "I am an attorney licensed in the state of Oregon, and I was Margaret Hayes' legal counsel for 11 years. What I am about to tell you is documented, verified, and currently under active investigation by the Portland Police Bureau's Financial Crimes Division and the FBI's Portland Field Office." The room was absolutely still. She pulled up the property records on the screen behind her. The Northwest 23rd deed, the county recorder's documentation, Walter Hayes listed as sole owner of record. Walter Hayes has not transferred ownership of this property. Rebecca said. The agreement Claire Cole presented to investors and lenders as evidence of a pending transfer is legally void under Oregon Revised Statute 93.020, which requires notarization and county recording before any conveyance of real property takes effect. No such recording exists. The title has not moved. A voice from somewhere in the middle of the crowd. A man in a dark suit who had the particular tension of someone whose money was involved. What does that mean for the investment agreements we signed? It means, Rebecca said, that you invested in a property Claire Cole did not own and had no legal authority to encumber. The room broke open. Not loudly, not all at once, but in the way a structure fails when the load-bearing element gives way, a cascading series of reactions moving outward from the center. I watched it happen across 200 faces simultaneously. Then a woman near the back stood up. Red dress, dark hair, her hand gripping her partner's arm hard enough that I could see the pressure from across the room. Our wedding is in October, she said. We paid $60,000. Another couple stood. Then another. Then one by one, with the terrible momentum of people who have realized they have been holding the same worthless paper, all 32 couples who had placed deposits on the ivory hall rose to their feet. $1,240,000. Standing up in the room, Nathan Reed stepped forward and held up the death certificate, the forged document that had declared Walter Hayes dead on the morning of his wife's funeral. Thomas Whitfield appeared from the side of the room with the purchase contracts for the 2 pianos, Claire's forged signature visible on every page. Evan was staring at Claire. His face had gone the color of old plaster. You said the escrow account was intact, he said. His voice was flat and stunned. Evan, you said after the transfer we'd pay everyone back. You said the money was there. Keep your voice down, Claire said through her teeth. Where is the money, Claire? Agent Karen Torres stepped through the main entrance with 2 federal agents flanking her. She moved with the economical purpose of someone who had timed this exactly. Mr. Cole, she said, we received the documentation you submitted to our office this morning. Thank you for your cooperation. Claire went completely still. She turned to look at Evan, and the expression on her face, the cold, absolute fury of someone who has just watched their most carefully constructed exit disappear, was unlike anything I had ever seen on my daughter's face in 41 years. You went to the FBI, she said. Evan's chin lifted. His hands were shaking, but his voice had found something solid underneath the shock. Last night, he said. You left your laptop open on the kitchen counter. I saw the file name. I read everything. He looked at her steadily. I read the divorce filing, Claire. The one you had your private attorney draft 4 months ago. Everything is in my name. You were going to walk away and leave me holding all of it. Claire raised her hand and struck him across the face in front of Diana Reyes's camera, in front of 200 witnesses, in front of 32 couples who had come to celebrate the venue where they intended to be married. The sound of it was very sharp in the quiet room. Marcus Bell came through the side entrance with Nina Parker and 2 uniformed officers. He crossed the room with the steady, unhurried pace of a man who had learned long ago that running toward an arrest rarely improved anything. Claire Cole, he said, you are under arrest for elder financial abuse forgery in the 1st-degree identity theft, wire fraud, and conspiracy. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Claire looked at me across the room as the handcuffs closed. Dad. Her voice had lost every constructed layer, the warmth, the competence, the careful architecture of the person she had decided to be. What was left was something younger and raw and almost unrecognizable. Dad, please. I know, I said. Because I did know. I knew she was frightened, and I knew she was finally fully herself in a way she hadn't been in years, and I knew that neither of those things changed what had to happen next. Marcus led her toward the door. Sophie was standing beside me. I hadn't noticed her move there. She slipped her hand into mine and held on, and I held back, and we stood together in the room that had been my workshop for 43 years and watched the door close behind her mother. Diana Reyes lowered her camera. The 32 couples were still standing. By midnight, the room was empty. The caterers had gone. The investors had gone, most of them with business cards pressed into Rebecca's hand and quiet, urgent questions about the recovery of their funds. The 32 couples had gone, each one carrying a letter Rebecca had prepared in advance, a formal notification of the investigation contact information for the Financial Crimes Unit, and a written commitment from Walter Hayes that every deposit would be accounted for. The crystal fixtures still burned overhead, throwing warm light across a room that had belonged to my workshop this morning and now belonged to no category I had a word for. Sophie was asleep on the small settee near the south wall, her green jacket pulled tight around her shoulders, her face in sleep, looking very young and very tired, in the way faces do when they have been through something that required more than they knew they had. I had tried to send her home. She had refused. She said she wasn't leaving until I did, and I didn't have the heart or the energy to argue with a 17-year-old who had just stood in front of her own mother and said, "Don't." Rebecca appeared at my shoulder and placed an envelope in my hands without preamble. "She left this with me 4 months ago," Rebecca said. "She said to give it to you when it was over." A pause. "I think it's over, Walter." She squeezed my arm once and left. I looked at the envelope for a long time. For Walter. "Open only when it's over." Margaret's handwriting. The blue ink she always used. The letters slightly forward-leaning, the way they always were when she was being precise about something that mattered. I sat down on the piano bench and opened it. But first, because something made me look more carefully at the sheet music on the stand, the handwritten score of Home Before Winter that had been sitting there all evening, I picked it up. I had played this piece 100 times in my imagination over the past weeks. I knew its shape, its arc, its movement, from the tentative opening through the resolved and quiet ending. But I had never looked at it the way I looked at it now, in the aftermath of everything, with the room empty and the night pressing against the old brick windows. Margaret had been a precise notator. Every dynamic marking, every articulation, every breath indication was deliberate and exactly placed. But besides certain notes, not all of them, not even most of them, just a specific sequence scattered across the 3 pages of the score, she had added small additional marks. Not standard notation, not fingering numbers or pedal indications. Something else. Something that, looked at in isolation, resembled the kind of shorthand a librarian might use when cataloging materials that needed to be found again. I set the score on this piano lid and looked at the marks in sequence. They formed a file path, a server address, an account number, a password, a complete set of digital coordinates pointing to an encrypted folder that, as I later learned when Nina Parker accessed it the following morning, contained backed-up copies of every piece of evidence in the case. Every email, every recording, every forged document, every bank record stored in a cloud server that Margaret had set up in 2021, under a name that was not her own, paying for it annually, with a gift card she purchased in cash at a drugstore on Northwest 23rd. She had built a redundant system, in case the recordings were destroyed, in case the USB drives were taken, in case the safe deposit box was somehow compromised before Walter could reach it. In case every physical piece of evidence was gone, the music would remain, and the music would tell you where to look. I sat with that for a very long time. Then I opened Margaret's letter, Walter. If you are reading this, the worst of it is behind you. I am sorry it had to happen at all. I am sorry I couldn't find another way. I need to tell you something I wasn't able to say while I was alive, because saying it would have meant watching you carry it, and you already carried enough. I was not afraid of dying. I want you to know that clearly. What I was afraid of was leaving before the evidence was complete, before the case was tight enough that Claire couldn't talk her way out of it, couldn't hire her way out of it, couldn't use your love for her against the truth. That was the only thing that frightened me. You are the most honest person I have ever known. I have loved that about you for 49 years. It is also the reason I couldn't tell you. You would have gone to her directly. You would have given her the chance to destroy everything. And I needed the truth to survive her. Use the money from the properties for something that matters. Help other people who are in the position I was in, alone, uncertain, not sure who to trust. There are so many of them, Walter. More than you know. Give Sophie the chance we wanted to give her mother. She is braver than Claire ever let her be. And live, my love. Don't just preserve things. Create something new. You always were better at that than you knew. I will be listening for whatever you make next. All my love always, Margaret. I read it twice. Then I folded it along its original creases and held it against my chest with both hands, the way you hold something when you understand that it is the last new thing you will ever receive from the person who wrote it. Sophie's voice came from the settee, soft and rough with sleep. Grandpa, what are you playing? I looked up. She was watching me from across the room, her eyes half open, her hair pressed flat on one side from the cushion. I haven't started yet, I said. You were humming. I hadn't known that. I pressed my hand flat against the piano keys, not playing, just feeling the cool resistance of the ivory, the instrument breathing beneath my palm. Your grandmother wrote 18 pieces, I said. In 30 years, she never performed a single one of them publicly. She said she was saving them for the right room. I looked around the space, the crystal fixtures, the white linen, the old brick walls that had been here since before either of us was born. I think this might be the right room. Sophie sat up. She pulled the green jacket tighter and looked at me with her grandmother's eyes, the particular quality of attention that meant she was fully present and intended to stay that way. Then play, she said. I placed my hands on the keys. I began with the simplest piece in the bundle. The first one Margaret had written in 1993, when Claire was 9 years old, and the workshop was struggling, and the future was genuinely uncertain. It was barely 2 minutes long. It resolved in a major key that felt after everything like a door opening rather than closing. I played it badly. I have never claimed to be a pianist, but I played it completely and in the right room, and Sophie listened without moving, and outside the rain fell on Portland, the way Portland rain falls in November. Patient, unhurried, committed to the long work of washing things clean. October in Portland is the month the trees finally commit to changing, and the walk from the parking garage to the Robert T. Matsui Federal Courthouse on SW 3rd Avenue took me through 2 blocks of maples going red and gold in the early morning light. I had not slept well. I had not slept well in 11 months, not since the night I played Margaret's music, in a room full of white flowers and crystal fixtures, and the aftermath of everything we had built, and everything that had been done to it. Sophie walked beside me. She had turned 19 in August, and she carried herself differently now, not older exactly, but more settled, the way a person carries themselves when they have made a decision they intend to keep. The courtroom was all dark wood and cold marble, and the particular institutional weight of a space designed to make you feel the gravity of what happened inside it. I sat in the gallery behind the prosecution table and looked at the back of my daughter's head, Claire was 42 now. She was dressed in a conservative navy blazer, hair pulled back, makeup understated. Her attorney, Frank Delgado, 55, silver-haired, expensive, had coached her presentation carefully. She looked like a concerned businesswoman. She did not look like the woman who had struck her husband across the face in front of 200 witnesses and a news camera. Federal prosecutor James Whitmore was 48, lean and deliberate, with the manner of a man who found emotional testimony more persuasive than technical argument and structured his cases accordingly. He opened without preamble. Margaret Hayes spent the last years of her life building a case against her own daughter, he told the jury. She did it quietly, methodically, and entirely alone because she understood that the moment her daughter knew she was aware, the evidence would be destroyed. She died before she could see justice done. We are here to finish what she started. Delgado's opening was predictable. A father who couldn't let go a daughter who tried to help a family. Tragedy mischaracterized as criminal conspiracy. He used the word love 7 times. I counted. Dr. Patricia Okafor took the stand first. She confirmed Margaret's competence, her blood pressure trajectory, Claire's attempt to redirect her care. Delgado tried to suggest confusion on Margaret's part. Dr. Okafor looked at him with the steady patience of a woman who had been practicing medicine for 30 years and said, "Margaret Hayes was the sharpest patient I treated in this decade. I am not confused about that." Thomas Whitfield testified about the forged estate documents, the cross-state piano sales, the phone call Margaret had made 2 weeks before she died. He spoke slowly and precisely and did not look at Claire once. Nathan Reed presented the forged death certificate. The jury passed it from hand to hand in the particular silence of people encountering proof that removes all ambiguity. By the lunch recess, Delgado had managed to plant exactly nothing. Sophie took the stand at 2:15 in the afternoon. She had turned 19 2 months before, which meant she sat in that witness chair as an adult, fully accountable for every word. She wore a gray sweater and no jewelry, and when the clerk asked her to state her name for the record, her voice was clear and steady and did not waver. Whitmore walked her through it carefully, the document collection, the signature copying the gradual understanding of what her mother had actually been asking her to do. "Did you understand at the time that the signatures would be used to forge legal documents?" Whitmore asked. "No," Sophie said. "She told me it was a handwriting exercise." "And when did you understand the truth?" "When my grandfather played me a recording of my mother saying she would blame me if everything went wrong." Delgado rose on cross. "You love your mother, don't you, Sophie?" Sophie looked at Claire for the first time since entering the courtroom. Claire was watching her with an expression I could not read from where I sat, something stripped of performance, something that might have been hope. "Yes," Sophie said. "I love her, but I can't tell a lie to protect her from something she chose to do." Claire dropped her eyes to the table. It was the first time in 11 months I had seen my daughter look down. Whitmore rested at 4 o'clock. The jury would begin deliberations in the morning. I walked out of the courthouse into the October afternoon with Sophie beside me, the maple trees still burning red and gold above the sidewalk, indifferent and beautiful. "How much longer?" Sophie asked. "One more day," I said. "Maybe 2, she nodded. Slipped her hand into mine the way she had in the workshop 11 months ago, when the door closed behind her mother and the 32 couples were still standing. I held on. The jury came back in 3 hours and 20 minutes. I know because I counted those 2, sitting in the corridor outside the courtroom, on a bench that had been designed for function rather than comfort, with Sophie beside me, and a paper cup of coffee neither of us drank. Marcus Bell sat across from us, forearms on his knees, saying nothing, which was the most useful thing he could have done. When the clerk appeared in the doorway and said they were ready, Sophie stood up so fast she knocked the coffee off the bench. She didn't stop to pick it up. The foreperson was a woman in her 60s with silver hair and reading glasses on a beaded chain. She stood at the jury box and read each count in a voice that was steady and clear and completely without drama, which was the most appropriate possible way to deliver what she was delivering. 12 counts. 12 times guilty. Claire sat very still through all of it. She did not flinch, did not reach for Delgado's arm, did not make a sound. She was performing composure the way she had performed everything else, and it held until the judge began to speak. And then I saw her hands flat on the table, perfectly arranged, begin to tremble. Judge Elaine Hartwell had been on the federal bench for 22 years. She looked at Claire over her reading glasses with the specific expression of someone who has stopped being surprised by human capacity for self-deception and has not stopped being disappointed by it. "Claire Hayes Cole," she said, "you deliberately and systematically targeted an elderly victim over a period of years, exploiting a position of familial trust to commit financial fraud, identity theft, and document forgery. The court finds no mitigating factors sufficient to reduce the recommended sentence. 14 years. Federal prison, followed by 5 years supervised release. Evan received 9 years reduced for his cooperation with the FBI investigation and his assistance in recovering assets from the Cayman accounts. The judge ordered full restitution to all 32 couples. The Garrett Holdings assets, a Delaware-registered shell company Claire had operated under Evan's name to conceal the movement of stolen funds, were to be liquidated and applied to the restitution fund. Any remaining balance was Walter Hayes's to direct as he saw fit. Claire was permitted, at Delgado's request, to speak briefly with family before transfer to custody. The room they gave us was small, a rectangle of cinder block, painted institutional beige, a metal table, 2 chairs. A corrections officer stood outside the closed door. I sat across from my daughter and looked at her face without the architecture she usually kept between herself and the world, and I saw someone I recognized from a very long time ago. She was 42 years old, and she looked like she was 9. "Are you satisfied?" she asked. "No," I said. "I'm not satisfied. I'm exhausted and I'm heartbroken, and I would give almost anything for this to have gone differently." Her jaw tightened. "You could have stopped it. You could have come to me years ago." "I didn't know years ago," I said. "And when I found out, I did exactly what your mother asked me to do." Claire's eyes filled, not performing now, not managing anything, just filling, and she pressed her lips together hard and looked at the metal table. "Why didn't she just tell me to stop?" she said. Her voice had dropped to something barely audible. "Why didn't she just come to me and say, 'Stop'?" "She did," I said. "Not in words. But she came to Rebecca. She came to Marcus. She built the case instead of confronting you because she knew you wouldn't stop. She knew Claire. She knew you better than you knew yourself, and she loved you anyway, and she spent her last years making sure you couldn't hurt anyone else when it was over." The tears spilled over. She didn't wipe them. "Can you forgive me?" she asked. I looked at my daughter's face, the face I had known since the morning she was born, since the first time she reached up and closed her tiny hand around my finger, and I understood for the first time that I would do anything for this person, and I felt the full weight of that love and the full weight of what she had done with it, pressing against each other in my chest. "Ask me again in 10 years, I said. "Mean it when you ask." She looked up at me then, and something moved through her expression. Not hope exactly, but the recognition that hope might eventually be possible, which is a different and more honest thing. The door opened. The officer stepped in. I stood. I looked at my daughter one last time. "The piano Sophie learned on," I said. "It's back in the workshop. It'll be there when you're ready." I walked out. Sophie was waiting in the corridor, leaning against the wall with her arms crossed, and her eyes red, and her jaw set in the precise way Margaret's jaw used to set when she had made up her mind about something difficult. "How was it?" she asked. "Honest," I said. For the first time in a long time, it was honest. She fell into step beside me and we walked out of the federal courthouse into the October afternoon, together, the maple trees still burning above the sidewalk. The city going on around us, the way cities do, indifferent and full of life. 6 months after the sentencing, the sign above the workshop door read, "Margaret Hayes, Music Center," in simple black letters on white, no gold, no serif font, nothing that announced itself as heritage or legacy. Just a name. Just her name. Inside on a Tuesday afternoon in April '83, students were making noise. Not music yet, mostly. The particular beautiful chaos of people learning something difficult. Wrong notes, finding their way toward right ones, the scrape of piano benches on hardwood, a 12-year-old in the back room running the same 4 measures over and over until they stopped sounding like 4 measures and started sounding like something continuous. That was Lena Rivera. She had come to us in January with her mother, who had stood in the doorway of my office and explained in careful apologetic English that they could not afford lessons anywhere in the city. I had told her the center operated on a sliding scale that went all the way to 0. She had pressed both hands flat against her sternum and breathed in sharply, the way people breathe when they have been carrying the weight of a no for so long that a yes physically startles them. Lena had been here 5 days a week since. Tonight was the first recital. Samuel had set up chairs in the main space, 40 of them long, which turned out to be not enough. Pastor Whitmore was in the 3rd row. Marcus Bell was near the back in civilian clothes, looking like a man who had not planned to be moved by anything and was privately reconsidering. Rebecca Harmon sat beside Sophie, their heads tilted together, talking quietly about something I couldn't hear. Sophie was 19 years old and studying audio engineering at Portland State, and she had wired the room herself that afternoon, with the focused, unhurried care of someone who had learned from watching a man spend 43 years doing things correctly the first time. At 7 o'clock, I introduced the program in approximately 4 sentences and sat down. Lena Rivera walked to Margaret's piano in a blue dress and sat with her back straight and her hands in her lap for exactly 3 seconds, composing herself, the way Margaret used to compose herself, before playing a habit I hadn't taught her and couldn't explain. And then she began. Home Before Winter. She played it better than I ever had. She played it with the particular unself-consciousness of a child who has learned something so completely it has stopped being a performance and become simply what she does when she sits down. The room went quiet with the quality of attention that is the highest compliment an audience can pay. I sat in the front row and kept the chair beside me empty and listened to my wife's music fill the room. She had never seen played by a child she had never met in the building. She had spent 7 years trying to save. When it was over, Lena stood and bowed with both hands clasped in front of her, grinning so hard her face looked like it might not be able to contain it. The room applauded. I applauded with them. After Sophie found me standing by the window looking out at the April rain on Northwest 23rd. "She left a letter," Sophie said. "Mom, it came last week. I've been trying to decide whether to tell you." "Tell me now," I said. "She says she doesn't want anything. She says she just wanted to know if I was okay." Sophie looked at her hands. "She says she's sorry." The rain moved across the window glass in long, slow diagonals. "Are you going to write back?" I asked. Sophie was quiet for a moment. Then, "I don't know yet, but I think I might." I put my arm around her shoulders and she leaned her head against me, and the music from the next student warming up moved through the old brick walls of the building my father had bought in 1974, and filled the space between us the way music fills the spaces it finds without asking permission, without requiring anything in return. The last student left at 9:15. Samuel locked the loading dock. Sophie turned off the lights in the back rooms, one by one, and the center grew quiet in the particular way that spaces grow quiet after they have been full of people, not empty exactly, but resting the way an instrument rests between performances, holding the memory of sound inside its wood. I stayed. I sat on the piano bench in the near dark, with the streetlight from Northwest 23rd coming through the old brick windows in long yellow bars across the floor, and I put my hand in the inside pocket of my work jacket and took out the cream-colored paper. I had carried it for 6 months. Through the sentencing, through the construction of the center, through 83 students learning to find the notes they were looking for. I had carried it the way you carry something when you are not yet sure what it belongs to, not yours, to keep, not ready to release. I looked at it one more time. It was not a remarkable piece of paper. Heavier stock than junk mail, the Wells Fargo letterhead slightly faded at the edges from 6 months in my pocket. The account information still legible. The yellow sticky note still attached, Margaret's blue ink still clear. Walter, take this to the Northwest 23rd branch and ask for Nathan Reed. Go alone. Go soon. She had written those words knowing I would find them, knowing Claire would try to bury them first, knowing that a cream-colored piece of paper in a kitchen trash can was the first thread in something she had spent years building, and that I would pull it, and that pulling it would change everything. She had been right about all of it. Sophie appeared in the doorway. She leaned against the frame and watched me holding the paper, and didn't ask what I was doing, because she already understood. Grandma knew you'd find it, she said. She knew me better than I knew myself, I said. That was always true. Sophie crossed the room and sat beside me on the bench. She was close enough that I could feel the warmth of her shoulder against mine. She looked at the paper in my hands, and then at the piano at the hidden compartment beneath the music, rest still visible, still open, the small brass latch catching the streetlight. Are you going to put it back? She asked. I thought about that. The paper had opened the safe deposit box. The box had led to the workshop. The workshop had led to Samuel and Thomas and Rebecca and Marcus, and 13 recordings and 6 months of the most difficult and most important work of my life. And now, it had led here to this room, to this center, to 83 students making noise on a Tuesday evening in April, to Sophie sitting beside me on her grandmother's piano bench, with her grandmother's eyes and her grandmother's particular quality of attention. The paper had done everything Margaret needed it to do. But that was not why I was keeping it. I was keeping it because it was the last thing Margaret had touched with the intention of reaching me, because her handwriting was on it, because some things that belong to the past should not be released, not because they hold you back, but because they remind you of the exact moment when the truth decided to survive. I reached under the music rest and pressed the latch. The compartment opened with the same soft click it had always made. I placed the cream-colored paper inside beside the bundle of sheet music tied with red kitchen twine and closed it. Not buried, I said. Kept. Sophie leaned her head against my shoulder. Outside, the April rain had started again, moving against the old brick. In the patient, unhurried way Portland rain moves in spring, softer than November, more willing to believe that something on the other side of it might be warm. I placed both hands on the keys. I did not play anything famous or difficult or long. I played the first piece in Margaret's bundle, the 2-minute composition from 1993, the one that ended in a major key, the one that felt like a door opening. I played it badly, the way I always had. but I played it completely. And in the right room. And Sophie listened without moving, and the music went where it went, and the rain fell on Portland, the way it always does, without asking, without requiring anything, simply falling the way true things do when they have finally found the place they were always meant to land. Some things that belong to the past deserve to be released, but the truth is not one of them. I am 70 years old, and I spent 43 years building something with my hands and nearly lost it because I trusted love without watching where it was walking. Don't be like me. Don't wait until the paper hits the bottom of the trash can. Don't let kindness become blindness. The people who love you most can also hurt you most, and sometimes they do both at the same time. God gave me a wife who was braver and smarter than I deserved. She spent her last years protecting the truth so I could find it. That is the only reason I am standing here. These family stories, revenge, don't always look the way you expect. Sometimes they are quiet. Sometimes they are built from sheet music and safe deposit boxes and a cream-colored piece of paper someone tried to bury. But the truth in these family drama revenge stories always finds its way up. Always. If this story stayed with you, if you recognized something in Walter's blindness, or Margaret's silence, or Sophie's impossible choice, then you already understand why these family stories, revenge, matter. They are not just stories. They are warnings dressed in other people's lives. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment. I read everyone. And if you haven't subscribed yet, this is the moment. Thank you for staying until the very end. It means more than I can say. The stories ahead contain fictionalized elements crafted with care intended to illuminate something true. If that's not for you, no judgment. But if it is, stay close. The next one is already waiting.